Governments around the world have come to understand this in a way that our government cannot. That wealth does not just trickle down from a few at the top, but rests on the contribution of the many, on the skill and dedication of those who work in our everyday economy. Care workers, postal workers, supermarket workers, and on entrepreneurs, innovators and scientists. Growth from the bottom up and the middle out. An economy rebuilt in the interests of working people. Because from security comes hope. Labour will commit itself to rebuilding that security, to restoring that hope. Labour is ready to serve, ready to lead, ready to rebuild Britain. Conference, I do not underestimate the scale of the task ahead of us, nor the problems we would inherit in government. They demand hard work, determination, and tough decisions. The exhaustion of Conservative ideas does not give us the freedom to push through programmes detached from our present economic reality, or take for granted those people who we seek to represent. Change will only be achieved on the basis of iron discipline. Working people rightly expect nothing less. Because when you play fast and loose with the public finances, you put at risk family finances. When the prices of food and energy and housing soar, it is working people that pay that price. Like the mum that I met in Scarborough earlier this year, a mental health nurse who had moved back home with her mum for 5 years with her young family to save the deposit to buy a home of her own. Only to find that when she was on the cusp of fulfilling that dream, after all that sacrifice, the mortgage cost that she would face outstripped her income, and she had no chance of meeting them. This is one of thousands upon thousands of similar stories. Stories I hear wherever I go, of people who have worked hard and done all the right things, but whose dreams have been dashed by the choices of this Conservative government, people who we must not and will not let down. So, a Labour government will not waver from ironclad fiscal rules, nor play the Tory game of undermining our economic institutions. The last Labour government granted operational independence to the Bank of England. I started my career as an economist at the bank, and I saw the lasting contribution that that made to Britain's economic success. So we will protect the independence of the bank, the Office for Budget Responsibility, and our civil service. And as Chancellor, I will put forward a new Charter for Budget Responsibility, a new fiscal lock guaranteeing in law that any government making permanent and significant tax and spending changes will be subject to an independent forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Never again will we allow a repeat of the devastation that Liz Truss and the Tory party have inflicted upon family finances. Never again will a Prime Minister or Chancellor be allowed to rush through plans that are uncosted, unscrutinised and wholly detached from economic reality. But let me address directly those who say that to make hard choices is to make the same choices as the Tory party. To them, I say, economic responsibility does not detract from advances for working. It is on the foundation upon which progress is built. Hard choices, but Labour choices. The choice to back our high streets and small businesses by requiring online tech giants to pay their fair share. The choice to levy a proper windfall tax on the huge profits that the energy giants are making. So that working people do not bear the brunt of a crisis that they did not create. The choice to abolish the non-dom tax status and put that money into our National Health Service instead. Because, Conference, if you make your home in Britain, you should pay your taxes here too, and with Labour, you will. And another choice. In my first budget as Chancellor of the Exchequer, I will end the tax loophole which exempts private schools from paying VAT and business rates. And, Conference, we will put that money into helping the 93% of our children who are in our state schools. And I tell you, if Rishi Sunak wants a fight on this, if the party that has herded our children into porta cabins while our school roofs crumble wants a fight about who has the most aspiration for our children, then I say, bring it on. Conference, we are ready to serve, ready to lead and ready to rebuild Britain. Thank you. I didn't come into politics to raise taxes on working people. Indeed, I want them to be lower. But the Tories have piled 25 tax rises on ordinary working people and businesses, while allowing the wealthiest to avoid taxes, keeping loopholes open, and letting government waste spiral. Taxpayers' money should be spent with the same care with which we spend our own money. I remember my mum would sit around the kitchen table with her bank statements and her receipts. We weren't badly off, but we didn't have money to spare. For my mum, every penny mattered. I learned that same lesson at the Bank of England. Responsibility must always come first. But for too long, Tory governments have allowed money to be wasted and taxpayers defrauded. So Labour will wage a war against fraud, waste and inefficiency. Today, I can announce 3 further fronts in Labour's war on waste. First, we will crack down on Tory ministers' private jet. What is Rishi Sunak so scared of up there in his private jet? Meeting a voter? Well, we will properly enforce the ministerial code on the use of private planes and save millions of pounds for taxpayers in the process. Second, we will slash government consultancy spending, which has almost quadrupled in just 6 years. Now, consultants can play an important role, but taxpayers must get value for money. So we will introduce tough new rules. If a government wants to bring in consultants, they must demonstrate value for money. And if they cannot, that request will be denied. We will aim to cut consultancy spending in half over the next Parliament. And third, we will go after those who profited from the carnival of waste during the pandemic. Today, the costs The cost to the taxpayer of COVID fraud is estimated at £7.2 billion, with every single one of those cheques signed by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor. And yet, just 2% of all fraudulent COVID grants have been recovered. So I can announce today that we will appoint a COVID corruption commissioner supported by a hit squad of investigators, equipped with the powers they need and the mandate to do whatever it takes to claw back the money that has ripped off the taxpayer, to take the fraudsters to court and to get back every penny of taxpayers' money that they can. Because, conference, that money belongs in our NHS, it belongs in our police, it belongs in our school. And let me tell you, we want that money back. We are ready to serve, we are ready to lead. Conference, we are ready to rebuild Britain. Labour will tax fairly and spend wisely. But, conference, I must tell you, you cannot tax and spend your way to economic growth. The lifeblood of a growing economy is business investment. It is investment that allows businesses to expand, create jobs and compete with international rivals, with new plants, factories and research labs coming to Britain, not France or Germany or America. But today, we lag well behind our peers for private sector investment as a share of GDP, with tens of billions of pounds less spent on new machinery and new infrastructure. Is that because British people aren't as hardworking, or as creative, or as enterprising? No. British businesses, from life sciences to creative industries, from digital to financial services, can and do lead the world. But they have been held back by the chaos and instability of this Conservative government. So Labour will aim to restore investment as a share of our GDP, the level that it was under the last Labour government, and to bring us in line with our peers, adding an additional £50 billion to our GDP every single year, worth £1,700 for every household in Britain. But we know too that asking businesses to do all the heavy lifting while government steps back is not an option. As our competitors understand, there is a role for government in encouraging and de-risking investment in new and growing industries. So we will provide catalytic investment through a new national wealth fund. Financial responsibility means knowing when not to spend, but it also means making sure that when you invest, you get the bang for your buck. So we will set that new national wealth fund a target. For every pound of investment that we put in, we will leverage in 3 times as much private investment. And conference, be in no doubt, no matter what political games the Tories are willing to play over our energy transition, no matter how willing they are to ignore the warnings of businesses, investors and trade unions, no matter how many times they put short-term political calculation over the security and the prosperity of the British people, Labour will make the long-term decisions and invest in British industry, driving down bills and creating new jobs. Jobs for plumbers, builders and electricians. Jobs for scientists, designers and engineers. In green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. In Grangemouth, Middlesbrough, Swansea and Hull. In steel, in Sheffield, Scunthorpe and Port Talbot. In offshore wind, in Fife, in Plymouth and Newport. making electric car batteries in Coventry, Sunderland and in Blythe, and jobs retrofitting homes in Keighley, Rochester and Warrington, and in every village, town and city across our great country. Ready to serve, ready to lead, ready to rebuild Britain. And conference. If we want to spur investment, restore economic security and revive growth, then we must get Britain building again. The Tories would have you believe we can't build anything in Britain. In fact, the single biggest obstacle to building infrastructure, to investment and to growth in this country is the Conservative Party itself. Just look at the fate of HS2. A major transport project lost, another promise broken, because the government could not keep costs under control. By the time this government even recognised that they had a problem, the project was already £30 billion over budget. The question must be, how was it ever allowed to get to that point? If I were in the Treasury, I would have been on the phone to the Chief Executive of HS2 non-stop, demanding answers and solutions on behalf of taxpayers, businesses and commuters. But with this government, it's become a pattern. When it comes to getting things built and projects delivered, Britain has become the sick man of Europe, with HS2 coming in at 10 times the cost of the French equivalent. And that is why our Shadow Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, will commission an independent expert inquiry into HS2 to learn the lessons for the future. Because many more major government capital projects are running over time, over budget, and are in danger of going undelivered. It is incumbent on government to make sure major projects are delivered on time and on budget. I will not tolerate taxpayers' money being treated with the disrespect we have seen over recent years. I will not turn a blind eye to dither, delay and incompetence. I will hold those responsible to account. I will demand action when they are not delivering value for money. And so I have asked Darren Jones, the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, to work closely with industry experts and trade unions and to examine line by line every ongoing major capital project to make sure that on day one of a Labour government, we are ready to get Britain building again. If the Tories won't build, if the Tories can't build, then we will. We will take on our antiquated planning system. Since 2012, decision times for national infrastructure have increased by 65%, now taking 4 years. With Labour, that will change. So today, I am announcing our plans to get Britain building, a once-in-a-generation set of reforms to accelerate the building of critical infrastructure for energy, transport and housing, to fast-track battery factories, life sciences and 5G infrastructure, the things that we need to succeed in the decades to come, and to tackle the litigation which devours time and money before we even see shovels in the ground, and to make sure that when a local community hosts national infrastructure, they will feel the benefit, including through lower energy bills. Conference, it is time that we had a government that matched the ambition that people have for their families and communities, a government siding with the builders, not the blockers, a government that will get Britain building again, and with Labour, we will. Let me give you one example. Our energy grid. Today, new developments are being forced to wait up to 15 years until the late 2030s to connect to the grid. £200 billion worth of projects stuck in limbo. So today, working closely with Ed Miliband, I can announce Labour's plans to rewire Britain, securing the supply chain we need for lower bills, and to build faster and cheaper, opening up new grid connections to competitive tendering. And because the British people could own a stake in their energy system, the publicly owned Great British Energy will look to bid into that competition. 220,000 new jobs, lower bills for good, and energy security for Britain. And there's more. We will invest in expanding local authorities' planning capacity to speed up decisions. And here is how we will pay for it. Rocketing interest rates have dealt a hammer blow to the dreams of millions of people who want to own their own home, when already that dream was far too remote for far too many people. It is not right that while so many people are struggling, many homes are bought by overseas buyers who may own a property but leave it vacant, driving up prices while families and young people are desperate to get onto the housing ladder. So because 1 year ago, Keir Starmer set out the ambition for the next Labour government to make 70% of British households homeowners, because a house should be first a home and not an asset, and because, conference, it is time we built the homes our young people need, we will raise the stamp duty surcharge on overseas buyers to get Britain building. Conference, Labour is the party of the builders, not the blockers. Labour is the party of economic growth. And it is now beyond doubt, it is Labour that is the party of home ownership in Britain today. Working people need the skills to succeed in the modern economy and the security to utilise them. From security, hope. The parents struggling to balance caring responsibilities and work. The key workers struggling to pay the rent. The would-be entrepreneurs struggling to access the finance to turn brilliant ideas into commercial reality. A productive economy cannot be built on such fragile foundations, because there is now a mountain of economic evidence that higher wages and greater job security have real benefits for businesses. And there is also a mountain of human of too many children growing up in poverty, of too many parents skipping meals, of too many people waiting by the phone to find out whether they have work that day or not. So, as Angela Rayner set out yesterday, the next Labour government will offer a new deal for working people. 0-hour contracts banned, fire and rehire gone, sick pay strengthened, and basic rights from day one. And conference, it was the last Labour government which finally delivered on the promise of Keir Hardie to implement a national minimum wage. The fight against poverty pay has always been at the very heart of our movement. And so the next Labour government will go further. Not a rebrand of the minimum wage like the Tories, but for the first time, a minimum wage taking account of the real cost of living. Finally, conference, with Labour we will have a genuine living wage. The post of Chancellor of the Exchequer has existed now for 800 years. In that time, not one single woman has held that post. Conference, when we next meet, I intend to address this hall as Britain's first female Chancellor of the Exchequer. To do so would be the privilege of my lifetime. But more important than that, it would come with a great weight of responsibility. The responsibility to show our daughters, to show my daughter, that they should place no limits on their ambitions. And the responsibility, too, like Labour women before, to drive progress for women. Still, half a century after the Equal Pay Act, women in Britain earn on average 15% less than men. On current trends, it may take until 2044 for that gap to disappear. But women cannot afford to wait that long, and nor should we have to. The work of women have been undervalued for too long. And that is why I have asked Frances O'Grady to examine how we can go further and faster so that the next Labour government makes the next great strides towards ending the gender pay gap once and for all, ready to serve, ready to lead, and ready to rebuild Britain. We have changed this party so that we may have the chance to change our country. Labour will fight this next election on the economy. Every day we will expose what the Conservatives have done to our country. Because the questions people should ask themselves ahead of the next election are simple. Do you and your family feel better off than you did 13 years ago? Do our schools, our hospitals, our police work better than they did 13 years ago? Frankly, is there anything in Britain that works better than when the Conservatives came to office 13 years ago? Now, if you do think that Britain is better after 13 years, if you think our country is as good as it can be right now, if after all of this you want to leave your future, your children's future, our country's future, in the hands of the Conservative Party, then I may not be able to persuade you. But if, like me, you think that Britain can do better, that Britain can be better off, if you, like me, believe that it is time to put security first and reject the risk of 5 more years of chaos and decline, then join us. Join us in our mission to rebuild Britain. Join us in our mission to give Britain its future back, creating new jobs, driving down bills, reviving our high streets, rescuing our public services, more teachers in our schools, more police on our streets, more doctors and nurses in our hospitals, lifting families from poverty, achieving energy security and bringing growth back to Britain. We are here, ready to serve, ready to lead, and together we can and we will rebuild Britain. Thank you.
Well, Peter Mandelson there, one of the previous architects of New Labour, with the applause there for that speech. And I think we got the message. Rebuild Britain, I think 9 times she was going with that message. Also talking about securonomics in terms of building and helping Britain to sell more. Iron discipline, ironclad fiscal rules, a new national wealth fund, fiscal lock, clearly indicating, as Liam was saying a little earlier, this is another Iron Chancellor in the making, perhaps.
And is it also, Mark, Britain's first female Chancellor that we're looking at in Rachel Reeves? What also got quite a big cheer as well was her announcement that a Labour government would tackle COVID fraud. They would appoint a COVID corruption commissioner supported by a hit squad of investigators to claw back the money, she says, that has been ripped off the taxpayer, that money being put into NHS and schools. Britain must get rebuilding again. She attacked the government's stance on HS2. She said it's gone because the government couldn't get the costs under control. Labour government would start an independent expert inquiry into HS2. I will not tolerate the taxpayers' money being treated with the disrespect we've seen in recent years, said Rachel Reeves.
In terms of tax, she talked of this fiscal lock, that any spending would be subject to agreement and forecast by the OBR, which, of course, is what Liz Truss got into such problems with. And in terms of taxing fairly, spending wisely. But yes, windfall tax was spoken of again, and stopping non-dom status. Let's get more with Liam, who's in Liverpool. And we may have to give you a new job title, Liam, as Securonomics editor as well as economics editor, whatever that means.
A very interesting speech, I thought, Mark and Pip. It was very, very heavy on rhetoric. She's kept returning to this refrain, ready to serve, ready to lead, ready to rebuild Britain, giving a sense of inevitability, more than I've heard from any senior Labour frontbencher, that they are going to win the next election. A really audacious statement at the end. I intend to stand before you when we next meet, the next Labour conference next autumn, as Britain's first female Chancellor. So there was lots of rhetoric, but it was very disciplined in terms of the actual policies. The only real money that she spent up on stage today was money that isn't the government's, it's the money of the business community, because she says she's going to ban zero-hour contracts and restore a minimum wage that accounts for the real cost of living, a genuine living wage. Well, of course, that's not government money that's being spent, because that bill will fall on business. There was a lot of stuff here for the left of the party to cheer. She confirmed that she wouldn't just remove the exemption for independent schools so they have to pay VAT, they'd also have to pay business rates. That's the first time that's ever been confirmed. The appointment of a COVID corruption commissioner. We want that money back, she said, pointing out that just 2 or 3% of those CBIL loans that have been deemed to be fraudulent, the money on those has actually been collected. It was all about fiscal prudence, it was all about responsibility, it was all about a contrast, particularly, she mentioned it several times, Liz Truss's budget. She won't ignore the OBR, said Rachel Reeves. She will improve the power of the OBR. Twice she mentioned she used to be an economist at the Bank of England. So it was a very effective, I thought, political speech. We saw Peter Mandelson there among the Labour front bench watching on. Some other old, if you like, new Labour figures are knocking around as well. There's a rumour that the other Miliband brother, David Miliband, could come back to government at some stage. So it was a clever speech. There were no real big slip-ups in there. There was no real money spent, no commitment to spend extra government money. And that would be a difficult thing to do, of course, because we've just seen government borrowing costs have gone to a 25-year high in recent days. But there was an awful lot here for the party faithful to get their teeth stuck into and cheer. Many of them surrounding the GBNews stand here in Liverpool, listening to what I'm saying, watching the speech on our monitors and cheering at the appropriate moments.
Liam, what got the biggest cheer then from next to the GBNews stand?
It was a very big cheer for the confirmation that VAT will be paid on private school fees and business rates. There was a huge cheer when she talked about, quotes, a proper windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas companies. Now, North Sea oil and gas companies would push back and say they were originally paying 30% corporation tax. They're now paying 75% corporation tax. So 75% of their profits go straight back to the exchequer. So I'm not sure what a, quotes, proper windfall tax would look like.
Yeah.
80, 90% of profits. Crikey. Also, there was a lot of kind of, if you like, I wouldn't say class war policies, but policies that are designed to appeal to Labour Party activists that don't really cost the government much money, may save some money, reining in the use of private jets by ministers, reining in the use by civil servants of consultants in Whitehall. She says she'll cut consultancy spending in half over the next governments. And as I said, going after those who profited from what she called the carnival of waste during the COVID pandemic, because just 2%, as the Shadow Chancellor said, of those CBIL loans that have been deemed fraudulent, of that money has been recovered.
Let's do some other numbers, though, Liam, because, of course, prior to his speech, Paul Johnson at the IFS, independent think tank, of course, very hard, he said, to improve public services without additional tax rises. The only thing we heard again was about the windfall tax, a proper windfall tax, as you say, and taking out the non-dom status. Is that going to be enough to actually fill their boots?
Well, if you ask me, if you increase the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas providers any more, they just won't do anything. It will just kill investment. It's already killed a lot of investment. I don't think you're going to raise any money by raising the windfall tax on North Sea oil and gas anymore, because it will just mean that a lot of the projects going on in the North Sea will shut down and investment will go to zero. And I think it's also in terms of the money that Labour thinks they can get from scrapping non-dom tax status, £2 or £3 billion a year. Again, I'm not sure that money will come through, because those wealthy individuals who live in the UK, who aren't from the UK, who are, quotes, domiciled elsewhere for tax purposes, they'll leave the UK. A lot of them will. They're very mobile, international people. And it is a very difficult situation for the Labour front bench, because a lot of their party faithful here do want the government to pledge to spend more money. Taxes are, of course, already at a 70-year high, 37% of GDP, but a lot of Labour activists want more. But the reality is, this country and a lot of the Western world is in what we call a fiscal straitjacket. Bond yields, the amount of money the government must spend on interest when it borrows, are way higher now than they were when Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were in office. They're at a 25-year high, the highest since 1998. And that's got nothing to do with what any politician says, Labour or Tory. That's got to do with real-world economic fundamentals, like the fact that financial markets think interest rates are going to have to stay higher for longer than we thought just a month ago, like the fact that the OPEC exporters cartel, Mark and Pip, something that we've talked about a lot, have been pushing up oil prices deliberately by withdrawing supply from global markets. And let me say, of course, the spectre of the horrendous events going on in Gaza, the horrendous events going on in Israel, looms large over this conference. Of course, a lot of people here will have some sympathy with the Palestinian side, and they're remaining tight-lipped. But what's really happening also is that the oil price is creeping up. And as the oil price creeps up, on the prospect of more trouble, more turmoil in the Middle East, then that's going to constrain Labour's spending plans even more, and the Conservatives for that matter, because that's going to make it harder for the Bank of England to get inflation under control, harder for them to lower interest rates. And as long as interest rates stay high, government borrowing costs are very, very high. We're already spending £110 billion a year on debt interest, the government spending on anything except the NHS. It's 11% of government revenue, and if oil prices go up more, that bill can only rise. But finally, Rachel Reeves, I think she had all that in hand. She didn't make any spending pledges that could be deemed irresponsible, but despite that, there was still plenty of rhetoric, juicy rhetoric, that the party faithful could enjoy.
Liam, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, Liam, of course, indicating the effect on the oil price of the international situation. Well, Israel has now declared a complete siege of Gaza is underway, declaring no food, no water, no fuel. US sources suggesting it may launch a ground incursion in the next 48 hours, while Hamas has claimed bombing has already killed 4 Israeli hostages being held in Gaza. These are the live shots there of the Gaza Strip.
GB News viewers can see the Gaza skyline as casualties continue to rise on both sides, with the latest figures putting the Israeli death toll at more than 700 and more than 500 in the Gaza Strip. In response to the continuing bloodshed, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, has said he will chair a Cobra emergency response meeting today.
Well, let's get the views now of former British Army Commander Colonel Richard Kemp joining us in the studio. Richard, thanks for your time. Will they go to this ground incursion? Because, of course, the assessment would be if that takes place, Hezbollah in the north may take action against Israel.
I think whether or not a ground invasion occurs, Hezbollah is very likely to attack anyway, either way. Yes, it might be on the cards as a response to a ground invasion, but my view is that Netanyahu has no choice other than to go in on the ground. Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza have to be crushed now. Israel's used kid gloves on them in the past. They've been extremely restrained, extremely precise in their responses to previous attacks, but this is different. This has to be dealt with finally and conclusively, and they have to crush the will to fight and the will to resist of terrorists inside Gaza.
OK, you say they have to crush them. What about the elderly women, the children that have been taken hostage by Hamas and are now being held in Gaza? How keen will Israel be to get them out, or are they a secondary priority now? We are hearing that mediators, Qatari mediators, they're holding urgent talks with Hamas officials to try and do some sort of swap for the release of Palestinian women and children.
I think the hostages are being held by Palestinian terrorists inside Gaza at the top of the Israelis' list of priorities. So, of course, they want to get them. They want to get them back. It's going to be an extremely difficult task to do so with an unknown number dispersed around different places in Gaza with guns at their heads in case there's a rescue attempt. So it will be tough, and Israel will have to take account of that. But they can't allow that to prevent them from dealing with this threat, which will result in even more people being kidnapped.
Just being told Foreign Secretary James Cleverly just visited the Israeli embassy to obviously discuss the situation. What about Iran? The suggestions that Hamas and what's happened has been directly influenced, encouraged by Iran. What about the wider picture? What does Israel do now about Iran?
Iran is behind this, there's no question about it. Iran funds, arms, directs Hamas and Islamic Jihad, as they do Hezbollah in the north.
Yeah.
I've certainly read reports that from Hamas and Hezbollah leaders that preparation and training for this took place in Iran, and the orders were given in Tehran to carry out this attack. So they were behind it. And briefly, Russia as well. Russia and Iran are in an axis. Russia has very close connections with all these terrorist groups in Gaza and in Lebanon, and Russia want to distract Western attention, particularly US attention, from the war in Ukraine, and this is the ideal way of doing it. This is a form of escalation on Russia's part.
So it's not just those fighters coming over the border. There is a direct international correlation on that. Well, Richard, thank you for being with us. We'll talk more in the next hour, of course, as we see the latest pictures here. As we say, reports that rocket fire is coming back into Israel at the moment, but certainly indications that there may be some kind of ground incursion in the next 48 hours. We'll have the very latest live from you from the scene. Stay with us here on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry for many of us today, warm in the south, but still some rain in the north. Nowhere near as much as we saw across Scotland through the weekend, more than 100 millimetres widely across parts of central and western Scotland, leading to widespread flooding. Severe flood warnings still in force, but any rain today will be mostly light showers affecting the Western Isles into the west of the central belt. Otherwise, some brightness coming through for Scotland and more especially across the rest of the UK. There will be some sunny spells, some mist lingering around Irish Sea coasts as well as southwest England, and there'll be some high cloud about as well. But still, with the sunshine, low to mid-20s in the south and feeling warmer further north compared with the weekend as well. Now, the mist and low cloud that we see around the coast through the afternoon will push inland somewhat overnight, so some dense fog patches forming across the south and west of the UK. Meanwhile, thicker cloud returns to Scotland with some outbreaks of rain pushing in by dawn. It's a mild night, but a cloudy start to the day on Tuesday and a wet start for western Scotland. Unfortunately, that rain coming on top of the very wet ground could cause further issues. Yellow rain warning in force, 50 millimetres in places. Not as much as we saw through the weekend, but we don't need any more rain, obviously. Now, the rain will push into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the afternoon. Drier further south and still warm.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock and you are with the Live Desk here on GB News. Coming up this hour.
Israel declaring a complete siege of Gaza. No food, water or fuel, they say, as Hamas says bombing has killed 4 Israeli hostages being held in the Strip. Will there now be an Israeli ground invasion of Gaza?
We're at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. We've just heard from Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves as she made pledges to rebuild Britain, restoring economic security and chaotic Tory years, backing high streets and small businesses, achieving energy security and lifting families from poverty.
The Supreme Court showdown as the Home Office brings its Rwanda appeals challenge on a decision to block refugees from being sent there, as another 218 asylum seekers arrive on the Kent beaches yesterday. Also coming up as a Cobra meeting gets underway with the government here in London trying to assess the latest situation. These are the pictures we've got from within Israel itself in Ashkelon. These are the military vehicles gathering there in the south of the country. You can hear some music being played over the speakers there, but we have the Israeli Defense Force declaring that there is no fighting now inside Israel. It appears that all the Hamas fighters that had come across the border through the gaps in the fence have either been removed or killed. But, of course, the Israeli military now on a high state of readiness with Benjamin Netanyahu saying the country is at war.
Sirens have also been sounding in northern Israel in the last few moments as well. And Israeli airstrikes, they have hit the Jabalia camp in the Gaza Strip. According to some reports, more than 50 people have died there. Israeli Defense Forces saying they are carrying out strikes aimed at many Hamas targets in Gaza.
More, of course, as we get it, but let's get an update now on all the news headlines. And Tamsin's waiting for us.
Mark, thanks very much. Good afternoon from the GB newsroom at 1:02. Israel's defence minister has ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off food, fuel and electricity. Israel has declared war, launching retaliatory attacks on Hamas after a surprise attack by the terrorist group on Saturday. More than 700 people have been killed in Israel and nearly 500 in Gaza. Israeli media says 300,000 reservists have been called up in the largest ever draft in the country. Israeli tanks and military vehicles are now massing in Ashkelon, near Gaza. Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari from the Israeli Defence Force says Israel will restore security to its people. The Prime Minister here in the UK is to hold a Cobra meeting to discuss the fighting in Israel and Gaza. A British man serving in the Israeli army has been killed, while 2 other UK nationals are still missing. The Foreign Office is advising against all but essential travel to Israel as fighting continues. Many flights to Tel Aviv have been disrupted or cancelled. Rishi Sunak has condemned Hamas's attack as an appalling act of terror.
It will be an anxious time for many families who have loved ones in the region. It's a quite complex situation on the ground, so we are working very closely with our Israeli counterparts to establish the status of any British nationals on the ground. That work is underway as we speak. But for anyone who does have family or friends in the region, the most important thing for them to do is follow the Foreign Office advice, but also the advice of the Israeli Home Command.
Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the Labour Party thinks the attacks by Israel are utterly appalling.
There is never a justification for terrorism. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. The hostages so cruelly taken, including children, should be released immediately, and Hamas's indiscriminate attacks set back the cause of peace.
We will bring you any developments on this story as we get it. On to other news now. The Shadow Chancellor says her party is ready to rebuild Britain. Speaking at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, Rachel Reeves spoke of restoring economic security after what she calls the chaos of the Tory years. She says Labour plans to revamp the UK's outdated planning system to boost the economy and confirmed plans to overhaul planning rules to speed up energy and 5G projects. She says the choice at the next general election is 5 more years of the Tory chaos or a changed Labour Party.
Out of the wreckage of Tory misrule, Labour will restore our economic credibility. We will lift our living standards, make work pay, rebuild our public services, invest in homegrown industries in every corner of our country, and together we will get Britain its future back.
The government is defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court. Lawyers representing the Home Office have told the court the policy to remove people to a country that is safe but less attractive than the UK is lawful. Sir James Eadie says the government has attached considerable importance to the deal. Over the next 3 days, several cases, collectively known as the Rwanda Appeals, will challenge the Court of Appeal's decision to halt resettling refugees. Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray, told GB News how Labour plan to tackle the small boats crisis.
They've had 13 years. The problem has got worse, and they haven't got an actual plan that would help stop these illegal boat crossings. And what we set out is how we would do that differently. we would use the money rather than wasting it on the Rwanda scheme. We would spend that money on a cross-border police force to make sure we could go after the criminal gangs who were responsible for these illegal boat crossings and stop them happening in the first place.
More than 400 criminals have been jailed for a total of more than 3,700 years after an operation by the Met Police. Operation Eternal investigated organised crime groups over a 3.5-year period by targeting an encrypted messaging platform. More than 3 tons of Class A and B drugs and nearly 50 guns were seized in the largest ever operation of its kind by the Met, with the force calling it unprecedented. Commander Paul Brogden says the gang kingpins have been brought to justice. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Tamsin, thanks very much indeed. Let's update you, of course, with that keynote speech from Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves at Labour's party conference up there in Liverpool, saying the economy must be rebuilt in the interests of working people, also saying Labour would give Britain its future back.
GB News presenter Gloria Di Piero is there with former MP Luciana Berger.
Hello there. Yes, and Luciana, you were in the hall for Rachel Reeves' speech, the woman who wants to be the next Chancellor. Describe what the atmosphere was like in there.
The atmosphere was just so full of energy. I mean, I don't recall a speech at Labour Party conference for a really long time where you had so many standing ovations time and time again, people clapping after so many different lines. But in response to what? A Shadow Chancellor setting out a practical and tangible plan about how we get Britain moving again, how we can see a country that has a future, that has people being paid a proper living wage, not a phony living wage as we see at this time, that's going to get this country moving. And I think that was very inspiring to so many people in this hall today.
Has she done enough to get people to trust the Labour Party, a Labour government again, with their finances, with their wages? Times are tough out there. Labour lost their reputation for economic competence when it left office. Has she done enough, or is there still more work to do on this?
I think Rachel Reeves was very clear in her speech today about the discipline that's required from an incoming Labour government to be a proper steward of the nation's finances. And she set out many ways how that can be done independently, so that the Office of Budget Responsibility can always hold the government to account, a Labour government to account, in stark contrast to what we saw just a year ago with Liz Truss as Prime Minister, when she trashed our economy, and there are thousands of people across the country that are paying a price for that today. So she doesn't want to see those mistakes repeated, and she also set out how we can't spend our way out of the mess that the Tory government will leave behind if Labour wins that general election next year. She set out ways in which we need to see growth, everything comes from growth, and how an incoming Labour government, if it's successful in the next election, will deliver that.
And she talked about wanting to get Britain building again, backing the builders. But you and I know, right, when we were MPs, planning is extremely controversial. New homes, there will be people in your community, your voters, who will say, actually, no, we quite like that green space over there. We don't want that new building, that new warehouse. So it's quite easy to say we're going to build, but actually the practicalities of getting consent from local communities is much more difficult.
Well, there's so many different things that can and should be done to get this country building and moving, and it's a travesty. And when you hear some of the figures that Rachel shared with us today, that there is billions, hundreds of billions of pounds waiting to be unlocked, creating over 200,000 jobs in this country, and it's in this kind of period of paralysis because there's no decisions being made. Part of the challenge is the delays that we've seen. We've seen planning departments up and down our country see resources stripped out, and they just don't have the capacity, the people to make the decisions, to even just do the legal processes required. We are all paying a price on imported energy in this country, when if we had the energy infrastructure like GB Energy that the Labour Party has set out today and previously, if we're making and creating our own energy, we wouldn't see the massive inflated bills that we're all experiencing. So we have to unlock it. There are some challenges, and I think it's right, we've heard some more from Rachel about how we do that. And I, for example, really like the idea that if you have energy infrastructure created and built in your community, that you should have cheaper bills as a consequence of accepting that on your doorstep.
Just one final question to you, and I'm going to change the subject slightly to what is going on in Israel. Israel has declared it is going to war after the Hamas attack, that terrible attack on Saturday. Now, the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian peoples, the plight of the Palestinian people is a cause that is close to many Labour Party activists' heart. What is the distinction between being concerned about the plight of the Palestinian people and anti-Semitism? They're different things, aren't they? Where's the line?
Well, let's be very clear that the attack is still ongoing. It didn't just end on Saturday. We've seen the greatest loss of Jewish life in Israel since the end of the Holocaust. And there's people that I met just a few months ago in Kibbutz Kfar, which is on the Gaza border, that are still under siege, and that situation is still ongoing. And I don't know if the people I met are still alive. And we've seen horrific, horrific brutality from a terrorist organisation in Hamas on our screens and on our social media screens, because some of it is too traumatic to actually put on broadcast. There is a big distinction between holding Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation, to account for the brutality that they have perpetrated and continue to perpetrate, and the Israeli and Palestinian people. You can be a friend and a supporter of both the Israeli and Palestinian people. That doesn't prevent you from speaking out when you see the torture and the hostage situation that we've seen. Over 100 people taken, women, children, pensioners, people slayed in their homes and their beds and in their bus stops. That requires, I think, everyone to stand up and speak out and say that is not acceptable. That's gross war crimes, and I hope that the international community can do something about it. And here at Labour, I've come back to the Labour Party. I'm here at this conference. It's a very, very different conference to when I was last here 5 years ago. It's unrecognisable. We've had very robust statements from the leader of the Labour Party, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, to say unequivocally that the Labour Party condemns the brutal actions of Hamas, a terrorist organisation, and that Israel has every right to defend itself. And if that was happening on our shores, we would do exactly the same.
Luciana Berger, always good to have you on the channel, always good to see you. For now, Pip and Mark, back to you.
Gloria, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's just to pick up with the latest we're getting with Israel's defence minister saying a complete siege of Gaza is now underway, saying there's no food, water or fuel being supplied to the Gaza Strip. A spokesman for the Israeli Defence Force, meanwhile, saying fighting within Israel itself has now ceased. But you can still see some of the smoke there rising over the Gaza Strip. Sources in the United States suggesting there may be an Israeli ground incursion into Gaza within the next 48 hours, but nothing official being said on that.
Casualties are continuing to rise on both sides. Latest figures put the Israeli death toll at more than 700 and more than 500 in the Gaza Strip. In response to the continuing bloodshed, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, says he will chair a Cobra emergency response meeting later today. Well, let's get the thoughts now of the director of Maidenhead Synagogue, Rabbi Jonathan Romain. Jonathan, good afternoon to you. Your thoughts today with Israel and Hamas being at war?
Oh, it's desperately sad. And not only that, it just seems so pointless. And it's not going to achieve anything, the Hamas attack on Israel, other than create widows and orphans. And we are largely talking about civilians. I mean, as you probably saw and GB viewers noticed from the Hamas videos, which they themselves released, Hamas wasn't attacking military depots. It wasn't attacking Israeli military. It was largely attacking civilians, and that festival, that rave that was going on. In fact, in capturing hostages as well. So it's appalling on a human level, but of course on a political level, it's not going to achieve anything. In fact, quite the reverse. It's going to set back the course of peace. And although it's a difficult area, actually we were inching towards a peace solution, not an immediate one, but. Israel was at peace and made these peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan some time ago. Last year there was the Abrahamic Accord 2 years ago with other Arab countries, Bahrain, Morocco, and as you well know, there was a peace deal with Saudi Arabia actually in discussion. And this is just going to sort of, knock that out of the sky, or maybe, who knows, maybe it was a deliberate attempt to derail that. But whatever
Jonathan, I'm just going to interrupt you. We're just seeing some more black smoke rising on the skyline there with our live shots. You've touched on something quite interesting there, as you were indicating. I mean, this US accord to try and get something up and running with Saudi Arabia. Suggestions this may be a direct consequence of that, with Iran becoming involved, sponsoring, of course, as the United States would say, or at least broadly complicit in these Hamas attacks.
Yes, I mean, I think everyone knows that Gaza is not a happy place to live in. It's economically enormously challenged, a high degree of poverty, and yet they've got all these very sophisticated, very powerful missiles. Now, where did they get them from? The assumption is it's from Iran. So in other words, it's other states interfering and providing weaponry. They'd be much better off providing hospitals and universities. That would have been the thing. So it's a dire situation, and of course the future is bleak as well.
Yeah.
And as we know from our own backyard here in Great Britain, from Northern Ireland, actually this doesn't achieve anything. The only way forward is going to be through negotiation.
We're just seeing pictures of more smoke. We've just seen pictures of armoured personnel carriers and other armoured vehicles massing at the border. Where do we go from here? Because we have these reports from the United States that there may be a ground incursion into Gaza. That presumably will escalate and brings into question what happens with Hezbollah in the north.
Yes, I mean, the future is only bad, certainly the immediate future. You know, because again, coming back to my point about pointless, it's not as if Gaza was occupied by the Israelis. Gaza was ruled totally by Hamas. They are in charge, and they've been in charge ever since 2005. So it's not an occupied country, nor is it, as it claims, cut off. There is a border with Egypt, so you know there is a free flow of goods and whatever to Egypt. So there was really no motivation for this sort of attack. It would have been much better to sit around a table and talk about a way forward. And of course, I have a lot of immigrants who are present, distraught, because a lot of Jewish people in this country have got family or friends out there. One, for instance, was going on Wednesday to a wedding. That's been called off because the groom is now being mobilized and doesn't know whether the wedding will take place. There's another friend whose nephew has just given birth to 2 twins, but he's not by the cot side. He's actually been called up to the front line. So this is an individual tragedy as well as a national one.
Indeed, I was going to ask you about the human cost of this, bearing in mind the scale of what's happened and, of course, the links between Britain and Israel. I guess many people are being directly affected by this.
Yes. We had a very large meeting, called a meeting at my synagogue in Maidenhead last night. It was overflowing, and people very concerned, both on the bigger overall picture, but also what's happening to individuals. For instance, one of the hostages that's being taken is an 85-year-old lady. She was actually British originally. She married somebody who came to the UK in 1939 under the Kindertransport. She's nothing to do with the war and the conflict, but now she's a hostage somewhere in Gaza. This is not warfare. This is terrorism, and I can't see a way forward. And what makes this conflict different from previous conflicts is, you know, there's been a usual pattern up to now, hasn't there? Hamas or Hezbollah has attacked, Israel has replied, and then eventually there's a ceasefire. This time, it's very hard to see a ceasefire taking place immediately. Plus, of course, the hostages means that there will be an ongoing crisis for a long time to come. And bearing in mind the size of Israel, the 700 people killed is roughly about 7,500 British people being killed here in England. What would we do if 7,500 British people were being killed? I think I've heard it said it's their 9/11.
Yes.
Well, it definitely feels that way. But on that point, I should stress that this is a political issue. It's not a religious issue. And I've been in contact with the local imam. We both said that, you know, whatever happens in the Middle East, we're not going to import it here to Britain. There's no reasons why Jews and Muslims can't get on very well. In fact, going back to 9/11, when that happened, I went to the mosque and said a prayer for peace in Hebrew. The imam then came back to the synagogue and said a prayer for peace in Arabic. There's some parts of the world where you get shot for that, but we did it. It didn't change the world, but it was a clear message to our congregations here in Britain that we are going to try and solve the problems rather than inflame them.
Rabbi Jonathan Romain from the Maidenhead Synagogue, thank you very much for bringing us your thoughts here on GB News this afternoon. Thank you.
Do stay with us, plenty more to come. We will be live in Jerusalem very shortly. Stay with us on the live desk.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk on GB News. We can bring you the latest pictures from Gaza. Gaza's health ministry now saying that at least 560 Palestinians have been killed and 2,900 wounded in Israeli airstrikes. That comes as Israel declares war on Hamas, and they seemingly want to reduce Gaza to rubble. Let's speak to journalist at the Times of Israel, Amy Spiro, who is live for us in Jerusalem. Amy, what do you understand the latest situation to be at the moment?
Right now, the army is still working to make sure that there are no terrorists left in southern Israel. They said that they have regained control of all the communities, but they still are concerned that there might still be terrorists. We're monitoring the border with Lebanon. Things are not 100% quiet there, and waiting to see what the rest of the week brings. There haven't been any completely definitive declarations over what comes next, and the whole country is waiting to see.
There have been these claims from Hamas that 4 of the Israeli people who were taken across into the Strip have been killed by bombing. Has the Israeli Defense Force or the government actually commented on that claim yet?
No, there has not been any comment on that. Those are the kind of claims that Hamas has made in the past, and they have certainly not always been true, and it's just not something that we can confirm at this point.
What can you tell us about these attempts that Qatar's leading? They've held calls with Hamas to try to negotiate freedom for the hostages in a swap for Palestinian women and children from prisons in Israel.
Yeah, I have seen the same reports that you have. I know that the Israeli government officially has said that they're not taking part in any negotiations. They've denied that they're involved in anything. That doesn't mean that there aren't talks going on, regardless, that Qatar is speaking to officials in Gaza, that Egypt is involved, that the U.S. is involved. Any of that could be taking place. Israel's not confirming anything at this point.
And what's the position of Netanyahu in the middle of all this? Clearly, he's having to lead a war cabinet at the moment. These questions as to why Israel missed the signals, why intelligence seemingly failed so badly.
Yeah, you know, we haven't actually heard from him directly, really, since Saturday night. You know, he sent out statements, but he hasn't addressed the nation at any point. We know there are talks right now going on to potentially maybe make a emergency-wide government with opposition parties. It's not clear what will come of that. You know, the questions over the massive failure of Israeli intelligence, of the government, of the military, that's something that will reverberate for months, years, maybe even decades. It's not something that's going to be determined anytime soon.
Amy, in Jerusalem, thank you very much indeed for joining us there. We'll be back to you later, of course, but let's speak now to former British Army Commander Richard Kemp, who's with us here in the studio. Richard, we're getting suggestions from the United States that there may be some kind of ground incursion into Gaza, which is what they've done before, but bearing in mind we've got, 100 hostages there, bearing in mind how difficult that operation was previously, is there anything else the Israelis can do?
They have no choice but to hit Gaza from the air, from the land and from the sea. And when I say hit Gaza, the terrorists in Gaza, they're obviously not going to target the civilian population.
But is that the difficulty, bearing in mind that, you know, how built up and how close-knit everything is there?
And it's not just how built up it is, it's the fact that terrorists deliberately use their civilians as human shields. They want Israel to kill their civilians. That's what this is all about. It's about provoking Israel to go into Gaza and kill as many Palestinian civilians as they can in order to isolate Israel and vilify Israel on the world stage, which is what we're about to see as well, by the way.
So it's the political game as well as the military game?
The political game being the point of the military game, you're absolutely right.
What will be, do you think, the international reaction if Netanyahu does, as I said earlier, succeed in reducing Gaza to rubble?
Well, I think the minute Israel starts, we've already seen it right from the very beginning. We've seen international reaction condemning Israel for what it's done. Yes, world governments and many media outlets have been supportive, but it won't last very long. As soon as the images of Israeli civilians being shot in the street, dragged and beaten into Gaza, as soon as that begins to fade, which it will in the coming few days, then what we're going to be focusing on is the number of civilians that are killed by the IDF. Unfortunately, but inevitably, the IDF do everything they possibly can to avoid killing civilians, but unfortunately, in this form of conflict, it can't be done, as I said, because of human shields. But that will be the focus. And we'll be hearing, we've already heard, the Palestinian authorities in Gaza, who are controlled by Hamas, saying that 400 civilians or something have been killed by the Israelis. Now, that's the kind of stuff they normally churn out, and it turns out when it's properly analysed that the vast majority are going to be terrorists.
Still nothing in the north. Still, I mean, the rockets being fired to a certain degree by Hezbollah, but we've been used, of course, to that two-pronged attack on a war on two fronts. Why do you think the delay?
Well, it's quite possible we could see a monumental barrage of missiles fired from Hezbollah into Israel at any time, and it may be that what they're doing is to wait until Israel's completely focused on Gaza before striking from the north. But let's not forget the strategic reason those missiles are there. Hezbollah is an Iranian limb. The missiles are provided by Iran. They're there. The reason they're there is to use against Israel if Israel strikes Iran or if the US strikes Iran. Right. That's what they're there for. They may be
deterrent factor, if you like.
They're not just a deterrent, they're also a reaction. Right. It's quite possible Israel might strike Iran as a result of this, because certainly in my view, and I believe in many people's view, Iran has got their hands right behind this. And Israel might well need to carry out strikes against Iran.
What do you make of the US Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner saying US believes Iran is broadly complicit, but at this time we do not have direct information linking Iran to the attacks? They're being a bit cautious.
I think when you're talking about intelligence, it's probably quite advisable to be, if you're an official, to be cautious. But the Americans know the reality. And one of the things that the Americans, and I think this plays into this whole conflict, the Americans, Biden has been desperate to appease Iran since he took office. He's released billions of dollars of frozen Iranian assets to Iran. All that's encouraged the Iranians. He's deliberately distanced himself from the Netanyahu government. This all encourages Iran. And I think this kind of caution about Iran's involvement here is part of the appeasement of Iran, which is intended to resurrect a deeply flawed nuclear deal with Iran.
Richard, thank you for your assessment. Of course, we'll continue to monitor the situation both in Gaza and from Jerusalem. But let's get the latest headlines now with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you. Here are the headlines at 1:32. Israel's defence minister has ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off food, fuel and electricity. Israel has declared war, launching retaliatory attacks on Hamas after a surprise attack by the terrorist group on Saturday. More than 700 people have been killed in Israel and 500 in Gaza since then. Israeli media says 300,000 reservists have been called up in the largest ever draft in the country. Israeli tanks and military vehicles are now massing in Ashkelon near Gaza. Israeli expats at Frankfurt Airport who fled Israel share their experiences.
Tension is quite high, a lot of uncertainty of what to do, we don't know.
I don't have enough words to tell you about the feelings, the
words that it's horror, but it's not safe and it's just, we don't know what will come, that's the worst. Yeah.
The Shadow Chancellor says her party is ready to rebuild Britain. Speaking at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, Rachel Reeves spoke of restoring economic security after what she calls the chaos of the Tory years. She says Labour plans to revamp the UK's outdated planning system to boost the economy and confirm plans to overhaul planning rules to speed up energy and 5G projects. She says the choice at the next general election is 5 more years of the Tory chaos or a changed Labour Party. The government is defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court. Lawyers representing the Home Office have told the court the policy to remove people to a country that is safe but less attractive than the UK is lawful. Sir James Eadie says the government has attached considerable importance to the deal. Over the next 3 days, several cases, collectively known as the Rwanda Appeals, will challenge the Court of Appeal's decision to halt resettling refugees. Those are the headlines. You can, of course, get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, let's have a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2167 and €1.1556. The price of gold is £1,518 and 98 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,502 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Let's just reflect that we've got a government Cobra meeting being held after the escalation of this situation in Israel. Up to 50,000 to 60,000 British nationals believed to be either in Israel or Gaza, according to government estimates, but reports too that more than 10 Britons could be feared dead or missing.
We have had it confirmed that one British man is confirmed to have died. That's Corporal Nathaniel Young, who was 20 years old, from London and serving in the Israeli army. Missing is British citizen Jake Marlowe, a security guard, and also photographer Dan Darlington. A third British man is also missing from the area of the attacks.
Government saying it's helping all the families of several individuals in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. We'll get more, of course, as we see the smoke still rising there over the skyline in Gaza. We'll update you with this changing situation.
The Prime Minister's plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda hangs in the balance as the Supreme Court has begun hearing the government's case to continue the policy.
Well, it's the Supreme Court now considering the legal test for assessing Rwanda's asylum system and whether people could be returned to their home countries and then face persecution. The Court of Appeal had decided the scheme was not ethical or indeed safe. Our reporter Ray Addison has the details for us. Well, I'm afraid we haven't got the sound on that report from Ray. I think perhaps we'll try and replay that for you.
Yeah, the Supreme Court has been hearing from the government's lawyers, and has been told that Rwanda says the government is less attractive than the UK, but is a safe country to deport asylum seekers to. Let's get the full story from Ray Addison. Ray, you are outside the Supreme Court. Bring us bang up to date then at the start of this three-day hearing, can you?
Yes, good afternoon to you both. Well, in his opening remarks, Sir James Edie Casey, representing the Home Office, as you were saying, Pip, described Rwanda as a safe but less attractive country than the United Kingdom. He also said this appeal is, over the next 3 days, at its heart about the judgments made by the government about the future conduct of a friendly foreign state. Now, just to give you an idea of the timeline that we've seen, of course, the Rwanda scheme was first announced back in April of 2022 by Boris Johnson, a whopping £140 million initial down payment for that. The first deportation flight was in June of 2022. However, that was stopped, of course, due to intervention from the European Court of Human Rights. Then in December of last year, the High Court ruled that the government's Rwanda policy was actually legal. However, that was then challenged in the Court of Appeal. It was overturned when they ruled that the policy is unlawful because Rwanda is not a safe place to send migrants. Of course, the concern being there that Rwanda might then send those migrants back to their home country. Now, in a very real way, this is the Conservative government's last roll of the dice when it comes to this Rwanda scheme. 5 Supreme Court judges are going to be hearing the evidence over this 3-day period this week, and then they will decide the following legal questions. Number 1, does removing migrants to Rwanda breach Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights? Of course, Article 3 prohibits torture and inhuman or degrading treatment. Was the Court of Appeal right to conclude that Rwanda was not a safe third country? That's the key element about whether migrants might be returned back to their home country. And of course, we know that the United Nations High Commission for Refugees believes that Rwanda lacks a reliable and fair and efficient asylum system. They're going to be giving evidence tomorrow on that very point. And finally, and this is quite interesting, is the UK still governed by the Asylum Procedures Directive as part of retained EU law? Now, if it does still retain that law, then it means that you cannot return any asylum seeker to a country to which they do not have a connection, in which case the Rwanda scheme is impossible to implement. Now, of course, the government is arguing that this Rwanda scheme is safe. They say it will actually save lives by deterring Channel migrants from making that perilous crossing. GB News understands that over the last 2 days there's been 300 crossings so far, around 218 yesterday in 6 small boats. Of course, Sir James Edie Casey was making his opening remarks this morning. He said that the government has introduced proactive mechanisms, insurance mechanisms, to make sure that Rwanda will be a safe country for any migrants who get sent there. Also, he's saying the Rwandan government itself has a reputational and financial pressure not to mess this up, and for that reason they will implement it strictly and fairly. Of course, there will be lots of evidence given over this 3-day period. Lawyers representing a number of migrants who came to the country to the UK on small boats, and of course the Home Secretary had ruled that their claims for asylum were inadmissible. They'll be making the argument that the Rwanda scheme is unlawful and inhumane, but we will have to wait until the end of the year before we get the verdict from the Supreme Court.
Ray, thank you very much indeed on updating us with that very complex situation. Of course, those 5 judges sitting in the Supreme Court on that. Now, let's just reflect on what we're hearing from the latest in Gaza and in Israel itself. The fighting in Israel seems to have stopped, but still in Gaza we see the smoke rising and reports or claims from Hamas that 4 Israeli captives have been killed in the latest bombing. And we await to see, of course, now what happens in the north in terms of what Hezbollah may do and indeed what Israel's neighbours will do, most notably Egypt and Iran, who the US says may well have been involved in planning these events. We can speak to author, journalist and Middle East analyst Adel Darwish, who can join us in the studio. Adel, very great pleasure to see you because you've followed these twists and turns over many years.
50 years or more.
What are you making of this and the timing and the way that everyone, including Egypt, has been caught unawares by this?
Absolutely. I mean, there are actually 3 circles we look at. The timing and the region, why it's happening now, and who are Hamas. So I'll start from the last point. Who are Hamas? Hamas, actually, the name itself does not have Palestine in it. So their claim to represent the Palestinians is absolutely false. It's called the Islamic Resistance Movement. So the name Palestine doesn't exist there. It used to be a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood with a long history connection with the Nazis back in the 1930s.
Wow.
Yeah, during the World War II, they had actually Islamists from Muslim Brotherhood working with the Nazis from the Munich cell. So that's their history.
Yeah.
Secondly, these people, if you look at their battle cry when we're dragging these women and children and soldiers and so on, they never once said Viva Palestine. They were saying Allahu Akbar. So their battle cry was an Islamist.
Right.
So they're actually a religious crusade motivated by hatred of Jews. So that's Hamas. They don't have the facilities, they don't have the know-how, they don't have the technology for all these missiles supplied by Iran. Now bring us to the timing. I've just been to Saudi Arabia last week, just a quick visit. There's a rapprochement, there's a cozying up between the Israelis and the Saudis. Younger generations of Saudi Arabians wanted, 40% of them, want to have commercial relations, cooperation with Israel. So Iran pushed Hamas to say, oh, we are here, we don't want to be left out. They won't just put a spanner in the works.
Right, and knowing what the Israeli reaction would be as well in terms of trying to get an incursion into Gaza and the whole thing firing up again.
I was actually listening to the previous guest who talked from a military point of view. That's exactly what they want to do, which has been a dilemma. Again, to put in context, when they talk about occupation, Gaza is not under occupation. No. Israel pulled out of Gaza. If you remember when you were Sky or covering it, the Oslo agreement back in 1992-93, they gradually pulled out. 2005, they pulled out unilaterally, totally from Gaza. Israel continued to supply water and gas and fuel, treat Palestinians in Israeli hospitals. So it's been going on fine until Hamas took over there. So that's actually the situation now. And if they want to drag Israel in, I think, my view, for 2 reasons. One, as we have seen, just turning all this liberal left-wing media against Israel, which is always looking for a chance to condemn Israel. And obviously, they will be collateral damage, civilian casualties and so on.
Can I just ask you, you say Gaza's not under occupation, which is true, but for people living there, it's said that it is like an open-air prison for them.
Well, it's rather unfortunate, but as I said, it's controlled by, they go like about 7 cross points, 3 of them operating with Israel and 1 between Egypt and Gaza. And this one between Egypt and Gaza, they actually under European Union and international supervision to be open for humanitarian reasons. So when there is no tension, the trade is going on, and even workers from Gaza go and work in Israel and living there. When tension is on and increased, obviously, these crossing points comes under scrutiny.
Yeah. Latest we're getting from PA, dozens of Palestinians killed and wounded in Israeli airstrikes on a Gaza refugee camp. how does this play out? Because there are also, as we see, Ashkelon there, we've got more military vehicles building up. Suggestions from the United States there may be an incursion into Gaza itself in the next 48 hours. Does Egypt, does Saudi Arabia, does Qatar have any sway to be able to persuade Hamas and Iran to pull back?
Well, I think Qatar, which is not on a good terms with Egypt and tension with Saudi Arabia, they have a leverage because the leader of Hamas actually lives in Qatar and financed by Qatar. But I think, again, the strategic point you have to be careful with, if the Israelis are dragged into a long war inside Gaza itself, Iran might push Hezbollah.
In the north. I was going to ask you, why have we not seen anything in the north? Because clearly last time this happened, there was a war on two fronts, effectively, with Hezbollah firing the rockets from the north.
And I think that's actually that's why the Americans correctly moved a battle group into the area just in case.
With an aircraft carrier, yeah.
Just in case that the some terrorist groups, some like Hezbollah and so on, would take advantage of a weakened Israel there. So that's why one have to be careful if the Israelis are actually get bogged down in Gaza, in addition, of course, to international pressure, and probably the Americans, and here, pressurizing them to stick within international law. But again, civilian casualties, which is tragically will become unavoidable.
We were talking to Rabbi Jonathan Romain earlier, and he said this is about politics. It's not about religion. Do you concur with that?
Well, yes, of course it's about politics, you know, like when the bigger players like Iran and Qatar and so on gaining. However, the young hotheads, like we've seen that policeman in Alexandria, for example,
shot the Israeli tourists, yeah.
Shot the Israeli tourists, and a poor Muslim guy tour there as well. So these hotheads don't quite understand that, but these ones are being fed a daily religious hatred, anti-Jewish propaganda, and that's why they've been moved there like pawns. However, as you said correctly, it's about politics, about the bigger picture.
And on that, will Iran have played the chess game and looked ahead, knowing what the Israeli reaction is likely to be, knowing Netanyahu's difficult political position at home in Israel, and they may expect some overreaction, if you like, from Israel?
Well, they were waiting for the overreaction because Netanyahu, I mean, again, I blame him for actually when his undemocratic move, he's under investigation.
The judicial reforms.
Judicial reforms, and he's been taking his eyes off the balls and focusing not on intelligence and on protecting his people, but on trying to avoid going to jail. So that's, again, however, for the Iranians and, again, the extremists in the Middle East, serves them if Netanyahu survives. Will be there because they have to play the same games. They want extremists either side. Because
keeps fueling it.
Keeps fueling it, and Iran not want peace. They have been putting spanners in the works every time there's a peace rapprochement coming.
Previously, ceasefires have ultimately been agreed. Do you think that is not going to happen this time?
It will take quite a long time because, again, someone somewhere need to be speaking to the Iranians there who, despite it, Americans say, yes, we're going to have actually evidence that will stand up in court. However, we know that Iran pulling the strings. Someone need to actually talk to them and say, what's your end game there?
Adel, as ever, thank you for your wise words. Unfortunately, 50 years on, the story continues, of course it did. Thank you for joining us in the studio.
Most welcome.
And, of course, we'll continue to monitor the events for you live from Gaza and Jerusalem. Stay with us here on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry for many of us today, warm in the south, but still some rain in the north. Nowhere near as much as we saw across Scotland through the weekend, more than 100 millimetres widely across parts of central and western Scotland, leading to widespread flooding. Severe flood warnings still in force, but any rain today will be mostly light showers affecting the Western Isles into the west of the central belt. Otherwise, some brightness coming through for Scotland and more especially across the rest of the UK. There will be some sunny spells, some mist lingering around Irish Sea coasts as well as southwest England, and there'll be some high cloud about as well. But still, with the sunshine, low to mid-20s in the south and feeling warmer further north compared with the weekend as well. Now, the mist and low cloud that we see around the coast through the afternoon will push inland somewhat overnight, so some dense fog patches forming across the south and west of the UK. Meanwhile, thicker cloud returns to Scotland with some outbreaks of rain pushing in by dawn. It's a mild night, but a cloudy start to the day on Tuesday and a wet start for western Scotland. Unfortunately, that rain coming on top of the very wet ground could cause further issues. Yellow rain warning in force, 50 millimetres in places. Not as much as we saw through the weekend, but we don't need any more rain, obviously. Now, the rain will push into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the afternoon. Drier further south and still warm.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it is 2 o'clock and this is the Live Desk here on GB News. Coming up this hour.
The Prime Minister to hold a Cobra meeting as violence in Israel and Gaza escalates. At least 700 have been killed in Israel, more than 400 in Gaza, and more than 10 Britons feared dead or missing so far. We'll bring you the latest.
The Shadow Chancellor delivers her keynote speech at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, pledging to rebuild Britain. Rachel Reeves also spoke of restoring economic security after what she said was years of Tory chaos.
And the Supreme Court showdown as the Home Office brings its Rwanda appeals challenge to try to block refugees from being sent there. Another 218 asylum seekers arriving in Kent on the latest boats from France yesterday.
Welcome to the live desk, and these are live pictures from Ashkelon, where military vehicles are gathering. Israel's defence minister has ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. Food, fuel, electricity and water supplies are cut off as they prepare for that ground incursion 2 days after those attacks in Israel by Hamas militants, which left hundreds of civilians dead.
Latest we're getting from the United States is confirmed the death of 9 Americans in the violence so far. That's from the National Security Council spokesman. We'll have the latest view from Washington, from Jerusalem and at the scene of Gaza. But let's get an update now on the headlines with Tamsin.
Mark, thank you, and good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 2. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country's response to the attack by Hamas will change the Middle East. Israel's Defence Minister has ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off food, fuel and electricity. The country has declared war, launching retaliatory attacks on Hamas after a surprise attack by the terrorist group on Saturday. More than 700 people have been killed in Israel and 500 in Gaza since then. Israeli media says 300,000 reservists have been called up in the largest ever draft in the country. Israeli tanks and military vehicles are now massing in Ashkelon near Gaza. Israeli expats at Frankfurt Airport who fled Israel have shared their experiences.
Tension is quite high, a lot of uncertainty of what to do, we don't know.
I don't have enough words to tell you about the feelings, the
words that it's horror, but it's not safe and it's just, we don't know what will come, that's the worst. Yeah.
Well, the Prime Minister here is to hold a Cobra meeting imminently to discuss the situation in Israel and Gaza. A British man serving in the Israeli army has been killed while 2 other UK nationals are still missing. The Foreign Office is advising against all but essential travel to Israel as the fighting continues, and many flights to Tel Aviv have been disrupted or cancelled. Rishi Sunak has condemned Hamas's attack as an appalling act of terror.
It will be an anxious time for many families who have loved ones in the region. It's a quite complex situation on the ground, so we are working very closely with our Israeli counterparts to establish the status of any British nationals on the ground. That work is underway as we speak. But for anyone who does have family or friends in the region, the most important thing for them to do is follow the Foreign Office advice, but also the advice of the Israeli Home Command.
Well, Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy says the Labour Party views the attacks on Israel as utterly appalling.
There is never a justification for terrorism. Labour stands firmly in support of Israel's right to defend itself, rescue hostages and protect its citizens. The hostages so cruelly taken, including children, should be released immediately, and Hamas's indiscriminate attacks set back the cause of peace.
In other news now, the Shadow Chancellor says her party is ready to rebuild Britain. Speaking at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, Rachel Reeves spoke of restoring economic security after what she calls the chaos of the Tory years. She says Labour plans to revamp the UK's outdated planning system to boost the economy and confirm plans to overhaul planning rules to speed up energy and 5G projects. She says the choice at the next general election is 5 more years of the Tory chaos or a changed Labour Party.
Out of the wreckage of Tory misrule, Labour will restore our economic credibility. We will lift our living standards, make work pay, rebuild our public services, invest in homegrown industries in every corner of our country, and together we will get Britain its future back.
The government is defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court. Lawyers representing the Home Office have told the court the policy to remove people to a country that is safe but less attractive than the UK is lawful. Sir James Eadie says the government has attached considerable importance to the deal. Over the next 3 days, several cases, collectively known as the Rwanda Appeals, will challenge the Court of Appeal's decision to halt resettling refugees. More than 400 criminals have been jailed for over 3,700 years after an operation by the Met Police. Operation Eternal investigated organised crime groups over a 3.5-year period by targeting an encrypted messaging platform. More than 3 tonnes of Class A and B drugs and nearly 50 guns were seized in the largest ever operation of its kind by the Met, with the force calling it unprecedented. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Mark and Pip.
Welcome back to the live desk. Let's bring you the latest pictures from Ashkelon in the south of Israel, near the border with Gaza, where you can see much dust and smoke there, where the armoured vehicles have moved away. We had armoured personnel carriers, self-propelled guns. We're not quite sure where they are heading. Bit of break-up on the signal, but clearly it is a very fluid situation. The latest figures we're getting, just to update you, is that the death toll in Gaza itself has risen to nearly 600. Still 700 or more Israelis have been killed. The United States in the past few minutes confirming the death of 9 Americans, that coming from the National Security Council spokesperson. The smoke still rising there above Gaza as the airstrikes continue. And these reports that more than 10 Britons are feared dead or missing in Israel, although the Foreign Office is declining to actually confirm those numbers.
Well, in the UK, the Met Police say they are not treating an incident involving a kosher restaurant in Golders Green as a hate crime. Windows were smashed and it was reported that a cash register had been stolen. Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper says she supports the police in tackling anti-Jewish incidents in the UK after truly barbaric attacks, she says, against Israel by Hamas.
Let's get to Golders Green and speak to our national reporter, Theo Chikomba, who is there. And Theo, clearly all political parties were indicating that they view what's happened as a terrorist attack in Israel. But there are different sensitivities being, put forward by some people there with these various incidents of, I think, the tube bridge there in Golders Green has had some graffiti scrawled on it. And also, as we were saying, this window smashed at this restaurant.
Yes, well, a very good afternoon to you both. First of all, it's worth saying that the community here are still coming to terms with what has been happening over in Israel following the Hamas terror group attack over there in Israel. In the last couple of days, people here have been communicating with their relatives back home. But where we are at the moment in North London, in Golders Green, just over my right shoulder, there is a Pitta restaurant over there, a takeaway restaurant as well. And this morning at 6:10, there was a call made to the police saying that there was a report of damage at this restaurant, but they are saying it's not hate crime. An investigation is underway and a cash register, we understand from the Metropolitan Police, was also taken. Now, there have been many people in this area. We understand the holiday is still underway, Jewish holiday, so many children and their families have been coming to see what's been happening. At some various points of the day, there was some tension reaction as many more people came. But what we do know at the moment is that the Metropolitan Police are investigating this. In this area, there are a lot more police than they would normally see, a larger police presence. Indeed, some of them are just approaching, so you may see them if you're watching us on television. And we've also spoken to Mike Freer, the local MP, about the situation that's been unfolding in Israel, and this is what he had to say as well.
The local community just want to get on with their lives, and it's not acceptable that they shouldn't be able to walk down their local high street, shouldn't be able to go into a Jewish kosher restaurant or kosher supermarket without fear of attacks. And what we've seen behind us, and obviously we have to allow the police to investigate, but I don't think it's a coincidence that we see a flare-up of violence in the Middle East, an attack on a kosher restaurant. And so the message to the community is they want reassurance that they're safe. And having spoken to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, the Security Minister is here with me today, that the government has their back. And the Home Secretary has told me that she expects the police to respond robustly to any incidents of anti-Semitism. We've seen over the years people legitimising anti-Semitism. That's not acceptable. We can see today the fruits of that, allowing anti-Semitism to take hold, and we need to stamp it out.
Theo, we can also show GB News viewers, at least, this graffiti, this pro-Palestinian graffiti that was sprayed onto a nearby railway bridge near to where you are in Golders Green. And the British Transport Police, we understand, are saying that it's being treated as a hate crime, this incident.
That's right. So that bridge you're referring to is the one just above us. So on this side of the bridge, you'll be able to see that graffiti which was put on there. When we did ask this to the Metropolitan Police earlier, they did say at the moment we can't say the two are linked when it refers to the graffiti and what's happened at the shop. In terms of what others are saying when it comes to this situation, the community's minister, Lee Rowley, has warned any potential protesters in the UK to be extremely cautious and saying they cannot glorify what Hamas has done in Israel. And also the chief rabbi to the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, Ephraim Mervis, says every Jewish community in the UK has been affected one way or another by the events in Israel. And he went on to say the first question we are asking people when giving them a call in the UK is, how is everyone in your family? So as we say, lots of people in this area are still coming to terms with what's going on. Spoke to one gentleman earlier whose family was at that event where more than 250 bodies were found last weekend. And of course, his family are keeping in touch to see how they're getting on.
Yeah, Theo, we just saw two policemen or community support officers behind you there on the pavement. So is there more patrols evident there on the streets, and are tensions still quite high there?
Well, at the moment, it seems as though I think people have returned to work or have come to see and return to wherever they have been. But there is certainly more police presence since we've been here in the last couple of hours. It's also worth saying that there's another special police force which works in this community to protect the Jewish community. We spoke to one man who works for that organisation, and we've seen them doing patrols every few minutes. You see them driving by, and this is likely to be the case for the rest of the day and potentially the rest of the week as well.
Theo, thank you very much indeed for joining us and updating us there at Golders Green. Thank you.
Let's get some more reaction on the ground in Israel and speak to Tel Aviv-based journalist Natalie Blenford. Good afternoon to you, Natalie. Could you update us on what the latest is? We are hearing that Israel has imposed a complete closure of the West Bank now, the occupied West Bank, where nearly 3 million Palestinians live.
Oh, well, that must have happened in the last 5 minutes, because since joining this call, I wasn't aware of that. So I can't actually comment on that because I'm not aware of that. I'm aware of what's going on with the Gaza operation, which is now seems to be underway. And there are widespread strikes in Gaza in an attempt to take out the rocket launching facilities and, of course, to rescue the hostages. So it is a multi-front operation. If they've closed the West Bank, it will be because they've had some intelligence that they believe that there is a danger of more terrorists incoming into Israel. because, of course, a lot of Palestinian citizens do come into Israel every day with permits to work legally in Israel. But what happened at the weekend was that Hamas asked that those people take up arms, take up knives, take up machetes and murder Israelis. So that will be what they are trying to prevent from happening if they have, in fact, closed down the West Bank at the moment.
And what about the north then, Natalie? Reports that there have been some incursions and clearly they're worried about what Hezbollah may do in reaction to this. I assume that Israeli forces are on standby up there.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier on, just a few minutes ago, it was announced that a number of suspects did infiltrate into Israeli territory from Lebanon. But IDF soldiers, IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces, they are deployed in the area, and apparently they have captured these suspects, but they have advised residents of local towns to remain locked in their homes. So you can imagine the panic, because what happened when we woke up on Saturday was no one knew about this. This was, as we said yesterday, a surprise attack. But now people know the news. So if you hear that a terrorist or a person who isn't meant to be here has entered the country close to your home, you may be quite petrified. So I can only imagine how scared those people must be right now. As I say, it's a multi-front operation. They're trying to secure every single border of Israel with enough soldiers to stop anything more happening. I know many people, as I said yesterday, young people in their 20s and 30s who have been called up to reserve duty. And they weren't called up to a training operation. They were immediately placed on the front lines, on the borders to protect Israel. So quite an intense situation. We are on a war footing. There's no escaping. I'm coming to you live from my bomb shelter bedroom. So I'm fortunate that I have such a thing. But I'm here because earlier on there were rocket sirens in the Tel Aviv area, and I didn't want to take the chance of doing this from another space. So, this is life here now for the moment.
Yeah. And what has life been like for you, Natalie, since these attacks first started early on Saturday?
Yeah. It's a good question, and thank you for asking. It's been just highly stressful. It's like the cortisol levels, the stress levels, and also the sadness, the kind of collective sadness, because there's so many people that have been killed, so many young people, old people just people being taken hostage. It's the stuff of nightmares. And at the same time, I remember on Thursday, I was filming all day on a really, really great job. And it was like life was fantastic. Everyone was happy. We celebrated the holiday of Simchat Torah. I'm not religious at all, but what you do in Israel is you just join in with the traditional moments. And I had a big festive dinner with friends, with children, multi-generational dinner, went home, woke up on Saturday into this chaos. So if you can remember COVID, if you can remember that sense of fear that underpinned every movement and every moment, it's that, but with the real visceral fear of not knowing if you're going to become involved. I popped out earlier to try and buy some ink for my printer, and I ended up being sent down to a car park underneath the shopping mall by police, being told to stay here because we were hearing booms overhead. Even though there wasn't a siren sounding in central Tel Aviv, they knew that the rockets were coming closer and closer, and they wanted to avoid an emergency situation. So they sent us down to this car park. So I'm sheltering in a car park underneath a shopping mall with strangers thinking, I'm sending WhatsApps thinking, are these WhatsApps going to be shared publicly because this is my last WhatsApp, or am I going to be fine? And thank goodness I was absolutely fine. I was able to come home and I'm safe. But it is that sense of kind of not knowing quite what's going to happen, and it's starting to affect people.
Yeah, a country literally at war, as Netanyahu has declared, of course. Natalie, thank you for updating us there in Tel Aviv, and we'll speak to you again and get an update. Stay safe, of course. Thank you very much indeed. Let's speak now to Mark Ullman, who's director of the Crisis Research Institute, for his view. Mark, thank you for your time. It is indeed a crisis. The extraordinary thing is that it seems that Netanyahu missed it, Washington missed it, even Egypt missed it. What was happening behind the scenes?
Well, this, as you say, is an extraordinary thing. The fact that Israel was caught napping on the border with its most important terrorist enemy. And it does seem that Hamas have, in a sense, shown that low-tech is the real threat today. The Israelis had an enormous apparatus of electronic intelligence and observation, but Hamas seems to have used couriers, word of mouth to initiate the attack. They have obviously spent weeks preparing this, and it is most bizarre that the Israelis didn't, for instance, see people being trained to use hang gliders. Remember, the Gaza Strip is a very small area, so that it's very difficult to do anything there that isn't observable from Israel if you're doing anything on a big scale. Hamas has, of course, a whole set of underground bunkers and tunnels where they store ammunition, where they assemble rockets and so on. But as soon as you come out into the open, until now, the Israelis have seen what's been going on. Now, of course, they're looking very sharply, but in a sense, it's too late for the 700 or so people who've been killed. And it has created not just a crisis between Israel and Hamas, but a wider rippling effect across the Middle East of dangers, drawing in perhaps Iran, affecting world oil prices, which in turn will affect all our economies, leaving aside the human cost.
And is that what Iran has wanted? Suggestions, of course, that they have been behind the planning on this. And it was the growing accord between Israel and Saudi Arabia, brokered by the United States, that had alarmed them.
Yes, I think certainly for Iran, anything that keeps Israel from having normal relations with its Arab neighbours, not least with the biggest, certainly the richest Arab state, Saudi Arabia, physically the biggest, along with Egypt, is very important, because what Iran wants to do is to keep Israel so far as possible isolated. And what under Trump had begun, perhaps being now pursued by Biden, was this attempt to bridge the gulf between Israel and the Arab states, Morocco all the way to the Gulf, and begin to have trade, to have tourism, to have all these things which it was hoped would break down barriers. Hamas, of course, completely rejects that, so they have their own immediate motivation to wreck any peace deal, because, of course, Arab television channels are showing the Palestinian victims of this counterattack by Israel. Sadly, because Hamas is based inside civilian areas, it's impossible for the Israelis to strike at Hamas bunkers without risking Palestinian deaths, civilian deaths too. And of course, those can then be used emotively to say the Israelis are engaging in genocide against the Palestinian people, Arabs like us, Muslims like us, around the rest of the Middle East.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your analysis there from the Crisis Research Institute. Thank you.
Do stay with us here on the live desk. We will be in Liverpool for the very latest on the Labour Party's annual conference. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves did a pretty big speech earlier. We'll be going through it very shortly. Stay with us.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys. On GB News, I'm GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. Let's update you. The Labour Party conference underway in Liverpool with the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, laying out her plans for a Labour government if, of course, it's returned next year.
She set out plans to give the OBR more powers to oversee government budgets, tackling COVID fraud and delivering for working people. The Shadow Chancellor also claimed to the assembled party faithful that Labour was ready to rebuild Britain. In fact, she said that quite a few times.
9 times, I've got down here, yeah.
Phil Collins, former chief speechwriter to Tony Blair, is in Liverpool for us with Gloria De Piero. Afternoon, Gloria.
Hello again, Pip, and also my guest, Phil Collins, who is a Times columnist too. You've also had a hand in writing speeches for Keir Starmer as Labour leader, so not just Tony Blair. Just let's start off. What makes a good political speech? What does he have to do tomorrow?
Well, there's 2 things involved in it. One is the performance. You've got to rise to it. But you can't really do that unless you've got something serious to say. Because what a speech at this venue really does is it's the way you clarify who you are. And it will be the way in which Keir Starmer sets out, this is how we're going to fight the election, and this is how we're going to govern. So even if no one's watching, there's a lot at stake, because it's a moment of strategic clarity, and that's what you're doing in this speech tomorrow.
Tony Blair, I think it's fair to say, he was a great orator. Keir Starmer, not so much. Some people think he's a bit dull. Is it a problem when you don't have that sort of natural pizzazz?
Yeah, it is. I mean, and Tony Blair clearly was exceptional, but not many people are like that. So Keir Starmer's more like other people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I wouldn't say he's dull. I think, though, you've got to work with what you are. Because the other thing about a speech is you've got to be in character. If you do something which is obviously phony, the audience will sniff it. So there's no point trying to be something you're not. He's got to work with what he is. And what he is disciplined and ordered and thorough and reasonable. And they're great virtues. And so I think what he's got to do is play on those, amplify those, and make those the things which are at stake in the election campaign.
The mood here, it's good. It's buoyant. Now, I wonder if actually it's a bit too complacent that the election's not been won yet. What do you think? Is complacency a problem?
Complacency is a problem if you get complacent, without doubt, because it means you stop thinking, it means you stop trying to deal with your weaknesses, you stop trying to go out there and say what a Labour government would be like. Because the other thing that I think lots of people are aware of here is that phase 1 of the Starmer project was get hold of the party. Phase 2, look as though you might be viable as a government. Stage 3, tell us what you are. And I think they know they haven't really done that. So I hope they won't be too complacent. It is a danger if you get complacent. If you get too happy, it's not a great place to get to.
Well, talking about happy, jokes. Jokes can be a tool. They're often a tool used in political speeches. You have written some cracking jokes, actually, for both Tony Blair and Keir Starmer. How important will jokes be tomorrow?
Well, I think they're quite important because I think they're a really good way of dealing with your opponents, because if people outside see you being really partisan and hitting your opponents hard, it doesn't come over very well, I don't think. Whereas if you're humorous about it, it comes over much better. And you can actually smuggle something really quite nasty into a gag. I mean, one of the ones I wrote
Go on,
where
tell
it
us.
said, Keir Starmer said that a couple of years ago, my dad was a tool maker, and so in a way was Boris Johnson's. Now that's a really crude joke, and yet because it was funny, it was okay. So they're great, but they have to come naturally out of the speech. And again, the rule is, if you're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. It's great if you can, but if you're not comfortable, you don't have to.
Well, we'll bring you Keir Starmer's speech live to you, of course. Back to you in the studio for now.
Gloria, thanks very much indeed for that. We'll also be updating you on events at the Supreme Court, hearing the government's flagship Rwanda migration policy having its day in court. The Supreme Court this time, not the Court of Appeal. But let's get the latest news headlines now with Tamsin.
Mark, thanks very much. Here are the top stories at 2:30. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country's response to the attack by Hamas will change the Middle East. Israel's Defence Minister has ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip, cutting off food, fuel and electricity. The country has declared war, launching retaliatory attacks on Hamas after a surprise attack by the terrorist group on Saturday. More than 700 people have been killed in Israel and 500 in Gaza since then. Israeli media says 300,000 reservists have been called up in the largest ever draft in the country. Israeli tanks and military vehicles are now massing in Ashkelon near Gaza. Well, here in the UK, the Prime Minister, who has condemned the attack by Hamas as an appalling act of terror, is holding a Cobra meeting to discuss the situation there. A British man serving in the Israeli army has been killed, while 2 other UK nationals are still missing. The Foreign Office is advising against all but essential travel to Israel as fighting continues. Many flights to Tel Aviv have been disrupted or cancelled. In other news, the Shadow Chancellor says her party is ready to rebuild Britain. Speaking at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, Rachel Reeves spoke of restoring economic security after what she calls the chaos of the Tory years. She says Labour plans to revamp the UK's outdated planning system to boost the economy and confirm plans to overhaul planning rules to speed up energy and 5G projects. The government is defending its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda in the Supreme Court. Lawyers representing the Home Office have told the court the policy to remove people to a country that's safe but less attractive than the UK is lawful. Sir James Eadie says the government has attached considerable importance to the deal. Over the next 3 days, several cases, collectively known as the Rwanda Appeals, will challenge the Court of Appeal's decision to halt resettling refugees. Those are the top stories, and you can, of course, get more on all of them. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk. Now, Rishi Sunak's plan to send illegal migrants to Rwanda hangs in the balance as the Supreme Court is hearing the government's case to continue the policy.
Well, the Supreme Court considering legal tests for assessing Rwanda's asylum system and detail whether people could be returned to their home countries and then face persecution. Well, the Court of Appeal already deciding that that scheme was not ethical or safe. Our reporter Ray Addison has the details for us.
14th of June 2022, and all eyes are glued to live coverage of a plane sat idling on the runway at Boscombe Down military base in Wiltshire. The Boeing 767 was scheduled to fly the first group of migrants to Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. But as the evening drew on, it became clear that the plane and the migrants were going nowhere. Legal challenges, including one from the European Court of Human Rights, meant the small number of passengers had now been whittled down to nothing. It was an embarrassing blow for then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his Home Secretary Priti Patel, who dreamt up the scheme to stop channel crossings.
The legal world is very good at picking up ways of trying to stop the government.
Since then, flights have been on hold as legal challenges progress through the courts. But the Rwanda policy has not been shelved, with first Liz Truss.
We're also taking decisive action by strengthening our borders and beefing up our border force and expanding the Rwanda scheme.
Then Rishi Sunak giving the scheme their full support.
We will pass new laws to stop small boats, making sure that if you come to this country illegally, you are detained and swiftly removed.
On the 19th of December last year, there was some good news for the government when the High Court ruled that the plan was lawful. However, that decision was overturned 6 months later when appeal court judges decided there was a real risk Rwanda could send migrants back to their home countries.
What the court today has found is that Rwanda is indeed not a safe country. People who were seeking asylum in this country would be at real risk had they been put on a plane to Rwanda.
But the government has refused to scrap the policy. Priti Patel's replacement, Suella Braverman, introduced the Illegal Migration Act, making it an actual duty for the government to deport asylum seekers who enter the UK illegally.
I would love to be having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda. That's my dream.
Now today marks the beginning of the end of this slow legal process. a 3-day Supreme Court hearing in which the government will argue only it has the expertise to determine if Rwanda is safe. Although a decision's not expected until the end of the year, Rishi Sunak has already indicated that if they win, he'll ignore any further migrant appeals and injunctions from the ECHR, all of which mean the next flight might actually leave the runway. And that is when the true test would begin. If the boats keep coming, the last 3 years will have been for nothing, and the Rwanda policy will have turned out to be a Tory flight of fancy. Ray Addison, GB News.
And our reporter Ray Addison is outside the Supreme Court for us this afternoon. Ray, the first day of a 3-day hearing, and the government telling the Supreme Court that Rwanda is less attractive than the UK, but it is a safe country to deport asylum seekers to.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Good afternoon to you both. So James Casey, of course, representing the Home Office, saying, as you said, that Rwanda is safe, and saying that the government has actually put a number of key safeguarding elements in place to ensure the safety of deported migrants, including an independent monitoring committee who would have the right to check every stage of the process and report back. Also, he told the court, Home Office officials will be based at the British High Commission in Kigali, that's Rwanda's capital, of course, and they'll have the right to observe every stage of the process and report back. Now, of course, this is very much the Conservative government's last roll of the dice on this policy, which dates back to April of 2022. 5 Supreme Court judges will make these key determinations. Couple of key questions for them. Does removing migrants to Rwanda breach Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights? Of course, that prohibits torture, inhumane treatment and degrading treatment as well. Another key question, was the Court of Appeal right to conclude that Rwanda was not a safe third country? Of course, the basis of that determination was the concern that Rwanda may send migrants sent from the UK back to their home country after processing. And that would be a serious concern if there's legitimate reasons for them originally fleeing that country. Now, of course, the government says that the Rwanda policy will save lives by deterring migrants from making that perilous channel crossing. Of course, GB News understands that over the last 2 days, around 300 migrants have made that journey. And the Coast Guard, in fact, was involved in a rescue operation just earlier on this morning. Now, among those giving evidence, of course, not just going to be the Home Office giving evidence, there will be lawyers representing migrants from countries including Vietnam, Syria, Iraq, Iran and Sudan. Now, most of whom travelled to the UK in small boats, and they were on that plane back in 2022, which never left the runway. They originally had their claims, of course, their claims for asylum ruled inadmissible by the then Home Secretary Priti Patel, which is why they were on that plane. Now, one of the arguments that their lawyers will be making is that the UK is actually still governed by the Asylum Procedures Directive as part of retained EU law. Now, that directive means that you cannot deport somebody to a country to which they have absolutely no connection, and none of the migrants who are in the court and taking part in the hearing that were on that plane have any connection whatsoever to Rwanda. We also know that the United Nations High Commission for Refugees will be giving its representations tomorrow. They say that Rwanda lacks a fair, reliable and efficient asylum system. The judgment is expected at the end of this year. If the government lose, what will they do next? They will need a plan B. Rishi Sunak, of course, saying that it's one of his 5 key pledges to stop the boats, and the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman's Illegal Migration Act, actually making it a duty for the government to deport asylum seekers who enter the UK without permission. So where they would go from here if they get a ruling against them, we don't know.
Ray, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. Much for those 5 judges to consider, as you say, with at least 3 days of the hearing to go. Let's update you now with the latest we're getting on the events in Israel and Gaza. The latest we're getting from Israel Khan TV is that 800 Israelis have now been killed, whereas we were getting a figure of 600 in Gaza itself, up from the 400 earlier. So the death toll rising on both sides. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying his country's response to what Hamas have done will change the Middle East. Indeed, Israeli military conceding that the border with Gaza is still not completely secure. The fence had been breached in many places, and that some Hamas militants or terrorists may still be at large, even continuing to enter Israel.
Meanwhile, the UK's chief rabbi, Sir Ephraim Mervis, has said it is a time of mourning and deep grief for Jews across the UK. And Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has visited the Israeli embassy in a show of solidarity with Israel. Well, we can go live to Liverpool and speak to politics and investigations editor at the Jewish Chronicle, David Rose. Good afternoon to you, David. Unfortunately, we are seeing incidents of anti-Semitism and racism against British Jews happening now, aren't we, here in the UK?
Yes, that is the case. This happens with depressing predictability every time there is a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, especially with Hamas in Gaza. It happened notably in 2021 when what was in fact confined to an exchange of rocket fire and airstrikes by the Israelis led to a tremendous upsurge in anti-Semitism on the streets of UK cities. This is already happening again. We've seen anti-Semitic graffiti daubed in the Golders Green suburb of North London, which is very much a Jewish area. We have seen a kosher shop trashed and vandalised. The Community Security Trust, which is a remarkable organisation which exists to protect the Jewish community, is openly stating that it now fears that the risk will increase in the coming days.
We're getting indications that there may be more military activity, David, in the north with the border with Lebanon, and clearly that, bearing in mind what's happened in previous years, will be alarming. But is there shall I say, a basic ignorance that people are confusing the issue of Palestinian independence with the actions of Hamas in detail within Gaza itself?
Well, Hamas has been ruling Gaza since 2007, when it ousted the Palestinian Authority, which, of course, is based in the West Bank in Ramallah. I mean, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Its charter says it exists in order to annihilate the Jewish state. Its leaders make no secret of the fact that they regard Jewish life as not human life. It is a racist terrorist group, and to confuse the actions of a body of that kind with the aspiration for a two-state solution with a peaceful Palestinian state coexisting alongside Israel is not just naive, it has to be malicious. The editor of the Jewish Chronicle, Jake Wallace-Simons, recently published a book called Israelophobia, and he suggested that hatred of Israel was in fact a new or recent form of the ancient hatred of anti-Semitism. Anybody who confuses what Hamas has been doing in the last 2 or 3 days with the legitimate aspirations of Palestinians for self-governance is not just deluded. Frankly, they are evil.
And what then of the part played by Iran? Washington is being a bit cautious about blaming any direct interference, but clearly the suggestion is that the planning of this did involve the Iranian Revolutionary Guard.
Well, this seems to be highly likely. We know that the Hamas leadership was in Tehran meeting with Ayatollah Khamenei and senior members of the IRGC just a few weeks ago. In the past year, I've published a number of investigative articles in the Jewish Chronicle looking at the influence of the IRGC in the United Kingdom and across the globe. And, you know, we have to be clear about what the stated goals of the IRGC and Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of the Iranian regime, are. They are explicitly to destroy Israel, which Ayatollah Khamenei regards as a so-called cancerous tumor. But beyond that, they believe in an apocalyptic ideology, which says that they want to prepare for the final battle between good and evil, when the Imam Mahdi, a mystical figure who last was seen on Earth in the 8th century AD, will return at the head of a band of 313 warriors and fight this final battle. But the precondition, according to the IRGC and the Ayatollah Khamenei regime, is the destruction of Israel and the extirpation, the complete annihilation of international Jewry. That is their stated goal, and we know that the connections between the IRGC, not only with Hamas but also with Hezbollah, are now very close indeed. And clearly the great peril for Israel now is that if Hezbollah, which is in every sense an Iranian proxy, if that starts lobbing missiles in large numbers at the north of Israel while the conflict continues in the south, that is a moment of very great danger indeed.
Yeah, and indeed we are monitoring the position where there have been some incursions, suggestions of both missiles and drones, but we'll update people as we get more on that. But David, thank you for joining us there at the conference in Liverpool from the Jewish Chronicle, of course, investigations editor.
We have been talking about how thousands of civilians on all sides are affected by this. And Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, he says his parents-in-law are trapped in Gaza after visiting family, leaving him very worried if they will make it through the night. Well, earlier we spoke to the director of Maidenhead Synagogue, Rabbi Jonathan Romain. He asserted that the Hamas attack was pointless and is only going to create bloodshed.
Desperately sad. And not only that, it just seems so pointless. And it's not going to achieve anything, the Hamas attack on Israel, other than create widows and orphans. And we are largely talking about civilians. I mean, as you probably saw and GB viewers noticed from the Hamas videos, which they themselves released, Hamas wasn't attacking military depots. It wasn't attacking Israeli military. It was largely attacking civilians, and you know that festival, that rave that was going on. In fact, capturing hostages as well. So it's appalling on a human level, but of course on a political level, it's not going to achieve anything. In fact, quite the reverse. It's going to set back the course of peace. And although it's a difficult area, actually we were inching towards a peace solution, not an immediate one, but. Israel was at peace and made these peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan some time ago. Last year there was the Abrahamic Accord 2 years ago with other Arab countries, Bahrain, Morocco, and as you well know, there was a peace deal with Saudi Arabia actually in discussion. And this is just going to knock that out of the sky. Or maybe, who knows, maybe it was a deliberate attempt to derail that. But whatever
Jonathan, I'm just going to interrupt you. We're just seeing some more black smoke rising on the skyline there with our live shots. You've touched on something quite interesting there, as you were indicating. I mean, this US accord to try and get something up and running with Saudi Arabia. Suggestions this may be a direct consequence of that, with Iran becoming involved, sponsoring, of course, as the United States would say, or at least broadly complicit in these Hamas attacks.
Yes, I mean, I think everyone knows that Gaza is not a happy place to live in. It's economically enormously challenged, a high degree of poverty, and yet they've got all these very sophisticated, very powerful missiles. Now, where did they get them from? The assumption is it's from Iran. So in other words, it's other states interfering and providing weaponry. They'd be much better off providing hospitals and universities.
That was Jonathan Romain updating us there with his reaction. Now, let's reflect that we've had a bit of rebuilding going on. Rebuilding Britain. Catherine Forster is at the Labour Party conference with us. Not Bob the Builder, but Rachel the Builder, it seems, Catherine.
Yes, indeed. Rachel Reeves promising to get Britain building, slashing regulation, planning regulation to make it easier to invest and develop green infrastructure, in particularly things like battery factories, wind farms, laboratories and 5G infrastructure. And a packed speech. It went down incredibly well in the hall, as you would expect. But of course, she's also had the seal of approval from Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, saying via video that she'd come from the Bank of England, she was an economist, it was long past time that her ideas were put into practice. They've had a business day today, they've been smoozing with businesses, they've been doing the smoked salmon and scrambled eggs campaign with businesses for well over a year now. A business leader I was with last night messaged me in the hall saying she's really good, and it does seem they have the momentum. So the slogan, let's get Britain's future back, I think that will resonate, and their basic message, are you better off than you were 13 years ago when the Conservatives came to power? They're betting that for the majority of people, the answer will be no.
Catherine, thank you very much indeed for updating us there in Liverpool. More to come from there. More to come, of course, from Israel and Gaza. Stay with us on GB News.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry for many of us today, warm in the south, but still some rain in the north. Nowhere near as much as we saw across Scotland through the weekend, more than 100 millimetres widely across parts of central and western Scotland, leading to widespread flooding. Severe flood warnings still in force, but any rain today will be mostly light showers affecting the Western Isles into the west of the central belt. Otherwise, some brightness coming through for Scotland and more especially across the rest of the UK. There will be some sunny spells, some mist lingering around Irish Sea coasts as well as southwest England, and there'll be some high cloud about as well. But still, with the sunshine, low to mid-20s in the south and feeling warmer further north compared with the weekend as well. Now, the mist and low cloud that we see around the coast through the afternoon will push inland somewhat overnight, so some dense fog patches forming across the south and west of the UK. Meanwhile, thicker cloud returns to Scotland with some outbreaks of rain pushing in by dawn. It's a mild night, but a cloudy start to the day on Tuesday and a wet start for western Scotland. Unfortunately, that rain coming on top of the very wet ground could cause further issues. Yellow rain warning in force, 50 millimetres in places. Not as much as we saw through the weekend, but we don't need any more rain, obviously. Now, the rain will push into parts of Northern Ireland and Northern England by the end of the afternoon. Drier further south and still warm.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake